Hello. Thank you for tuning in to this General Election Candidates Forum for State Legislative District 2, Position 1. The forum is presented by the League of Women Voters of Thurston County and TCTV. The League is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government. The League registers voters, studies issues, and advocates for its position with local, state, and federal governments. The League is open to men and women of voting age. I'm Rita Robison, a League member, and I'll be moderating this forum. The candidates for Legislative District 2, Position 1 are Gary Alexander and Greg Hartman. For this forum, the candidates will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Then I'll ask them questions in alternating order. The person first asked the question will have 2 minutes for a response, followed by 1 minute from the other candidate. There'll be 1 minute for closing statements. We'll begin with opening statements from the candidates, starting with Greg.
Good morning, and I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters and TCTV for having us here this afternoon. I have 7 years' experience in the United States Coast Guard, 33 years in the fire service. I'm currently a battalion chief, and the perspective that gives me is that to solve problems, we must identify the problems, look at solutions, and be willing to implement those solutions. And my vision for the state of Washington is based on a clear understanding of the challenges that we face on a daily basis, such as education, transportation, health care, elder care, and the state budget. And the commonality with all these challenges is that they're not new. Our legislature has been dealing with these problems for many years. And for effective change, we cannot continue with politics as usual. We must be willing, we must be courageous enough to stand up and say change is what we need to look for. We need to look for answers, ideas. We need to push those forward. That's what leaders do. They analyze the problem, they pick the best solution, they implement that solution, and in our case in particular, we'll tell the taxpayers why we're doing what we're doing, what the cost of that is, and long-term, what the benefits are. And as an example, education. We all understand that basic education needs to be funded. The problem is that when we don't do that, we're not investing in the future. In our region, we have some of the best technological jobs in the country, but we don't have trained candidates to fill those. So through proper education and training, we can fill those gaps. We can have better wage jobs, consequently improve the economy of the state and the region, and thereby address the problems that we face in an economic manner. I'm willing to stand up, take responsibility for my decisions, and help move Washington State forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Gary?
Hi, I'm State Representative Gary Alexander. I live in rural Thurston County with my lovely wife Donna, and for the past decade I've been representing the constituents and voters in the 20th district, which encompasses parts of the southeastern part of Thurston County and all of Lewis County. With redistricting and your vote, I'm hopeful to also represent the people in the 2nd district now, which basically includes Yelm, includes the city of Yelm, includes the city of Roy, includes Eatonville, Ording, Graham, and the eastern parts of Pierce County. I've been doorbelling in these areas, and I've heard the common theme in almost every door. The 2 most important issues that are facing us today are job, getting people back to work, and making sure we have an educated workforce. I currently serve as the ranking Republican on the House Ways and Means Committee, where I basically have been serving for the past 8 to 10 years. The issue that's most important to me right now is making sure we have a sustainable budget, a budget that is not only one that meets our requirements within the revenue base that we're having, but also prioritizes where that money should be spent. I've been a leader in prioritizing our spending, not only for our district, but for the state of Washington as a whole. I also serve on the Education Funding Task Force. with the recent decision by the McCleary decision, we are basically needing to meet our paramount responsibility. I think that is one of the most fundamental requirements we have to do. That is why I elected to serve in this committee and why I'm looking for a solution that's not only going to take care of our education today, but our education for the next 2 to 3 decades. Appreciate talking to you and appreciate your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now the questions. The first question goes to Gary. Do you support charter schools for Washington State? Why? Why not?
Well, I support the concept of charter schools. I basically have felt that we need to have some sort of an alternative out there to see if it's going to work. But what I've said to most everybody at this point in time is I'm not sure that this particular initiative in front of us doesn't go too far. I'd like to see like 4 or 5 major charter schools out there that basically we can test as pilots to see if this system is going to work and provide us a better education outcomes. I think maybe going 40 maybe just a little too far. So I'm basically reserving my vote on this issue right now, but at this point in time, I'd like to see a little smaller direction as how we go with charter schools.
Thank you. Greg?
Okay, I'm opposed to charter schools. I think that we have enough responsibility currently to work on our school system, to work on funding to make the inroads in education that we think are most appropriate. And consequently, charter schools, although there's merit to the concept, I think that from an efficiency standpoint, from a budgetary standpoint, that there's lots of questions that are not currently answered. And until that's done, I think charter schools would be more of a distraction. Currently, our schools have the ability to have a diverse school in the sense that we have magnet schools, we have specific like aviation schools. So our school districts have the ability to diversify. We're working on teachers taking responsibility and have shared opportunities to make our schools more effective. And I think working on those, having a sound educational system within Washington would allow us to experience other opportunities in a more positive way.
Thank you. Greg, what do you know about the plans for construction of terminals for the export of coal in our state in Oregon, as well as the transporting of coal in open cars? Do you support these plans? Why or why not?
Okay, that's a good question. I guess what I know about the coals more specifically is that fundamentally they provide jobs for our region. We have a depressed region statewide, and so when we have jobs in front of us, it's hard to say that no, we should turn away from that. I've heard not economic, but environmental concerns about the trains, the impacts of the trains. There's lots of studies pro and con for that. What I'd have to say here today is that I support coals, I support coal train in the sense that once we do that, that increases some economic stability for Washington, but also what it allows us to do is to be at the table. And if we turn down the coal trains, as an example, that coal is still going to go across the water. It's going to go to China, and they're going to do with it what they will. So for us to develop it in Washington, to create the jobs, sustain our economy, and then meet with China, talk about the economic impacts, talk about how coal out of Washington impacts China, and we're at the table. And without that, it's going to happen regardless, and we won't have as much impact.
Thank you. Gary?
Well, you know, the coal production has been one of the most paramount job creations and retentions in the district I represent right now. TransAlta, which operates the steam plant in Centralia, one of the first bills that I worked on was putting in scrubbers to try to ensure the environmental responsiveness of our steam plant in Centralia. Even with that, we lost the ability to produce coal out of the mines, and right now that caused almost 300 to 400 loss of jobs, and now basically we just have the steam plant operation. We are phasing that out. I worked with a bill that works with phasing that out into natural gas by the year 2025, but we need to be able to use and transport coal in a responsible way, because it still is a major economic driver in our country, in our state. And until we have the alternatives, let's find a way to safely transport that coal to countries like China that can basically produce their energy from that source.
Thank you. Gary, the courts have said Washington isn't living up to its obligation to fully fund basic education. How do you define basic education, and how do you propose to fund it?
Well, that's exactly the question I'm trying to answer as a member of the Education Funding Task Force. We basically, in the House Republican caucus, under my leadership, we basically came out last year and said education is our paramount responsibility and we should fund it and fund it first. That particular issue is catching on in both parties at this point in time. But the most important thing right now is we have to define what that obligation is. And I'm hopeful by the next meeting, which is the fourth meeting we'll be together, we will define what that basic obligation is as it was outlined in House Bill 2261 and House Bill 2776. Once we define that obligation and define it in a way that we can all be assured that this is what the responsible allocations are of that meeting basic education, including transportation, including all-day kindergarten, including class size reductions for the early parts of our children's education, then the next and most important thing is how are we going to do that in a phased-in plan between now and 2018 to meet that McCleary decision. And we need to prioritize what goes first, what goes second, and it shouldn't be just divide the number of $3 billion by 5. We should basically take a look at what is the most important thing to do first and do that in its holistic fashion. And I'm going to be working very hard not only to see what that obligation is, define it, define the priorities of how we go about phasing it, but then coming back to legislature and doing it and showing and demonstrating to the courts that we are going to be able to accomplish that. And that's why I'm also on the task force that's working with the Supreme Court to make sure we uphold that obligation.
Thank you. Greg?
Okay, I guess the very first point I'd like to make is that funding basic education is not new. And the fact that the courts had to mandate the legislature to go out and do the kinds of issues or make the kinds of laws necessary to fund education fully just astounds me. We've known for years the value of education, and how we're going to fund that is primarily understanding that we live in a rich technological region that says that we have hundreds of jobs that are not currently being filled. And what we're doing through basic education is we're funding our future. We're creating our leaders, the kinds of people that we need to move our state forward. And by underselling that, we're not letting the people know the importance of education. So whatever that cost is, we need to define that, move it forward, let people know why. I understand it's a priority, and everybody's on that bandwagon now, but understand it's not new. There's plenty of alternatives to move it forward. We need the commitment from the legislature to take that responsibility and push it forward regardless.
Thank you. Greg, the state's park permit program brought in only half of the revenue that was projected from those sales. In addition, the legislature has provided zero funding in the budget for state parks in the next biennium. As a legislator, how do you think we can keep our state parks operating?
Okay, well, as a state legislature, what I would like to say from a state park standpoint is that's a fundamental asset to the state of Washington. People gravitate to the parks. They place high value on those. But unfortunately, given our economic conditions, what we do is we say, well, we have school funding that's got to be done. We have health care. We have all these other priorities. And consequently, what happens is the parks get left behind. But they're a treasure. They're a value for not only your children and mine, but their children as well. So what kind of priority, what kind of value do we put on those? I understand very clearly that the Parks Department has been efficient. They've cut staffing. They have volunteer hours. I mean, I've heard talk of public, private sector partnerships to help move state parks forward, but it still comes down to saying, what is the value? What are we willing to pay for that, and what's the cost? And once that's clearly defined, we incorporate that into our budget and we move that forward. Without clearly defining what the responsibilities and what the benefits are, it's harder to tell the people why we're spending their money. And I clearly understand the importance of being good stewards of tax dollars. That's important. But parks in particular are an asset. They're a treasure that, that we can experience for decades ahead of us. But if we don't protect them, if we don't preserve them, what's going to happen is we're going to sell stuff off. We're going to sell portions off to help pay for it. I don't think that's the best way to do that. I personally would look for permanent funding for parks based on what the people want. And fundamentally, if push comes to shove, we take the parks to the voters and say, this is what we want to do. We're obligating the funds to support parks from now on, and this is what it's going to cost, and this is how we're going to implement that.
Thank you. Gary?
Well, certainly, it's been interesting because Republicans have been one of the strongest supporters of keeping our parks open. The area here, though, the Discover Pass and the non-voluntary license fee has not been the best solution to raising revenue. We did a study a number of years ago to define what ratio of revenue should come from the park users and what ratio should come from the general taxpayers of the state. And right now, the situation is that we are not upholding that particular obligation. It is a general state responsibility. It is one that the overall public should provide. We have to take a look at which parks should basically be open seasonally, which ones should be open year-round, and then basically determine what the operating costs of those parks are, and then find a more solid solution to how we fund them.
Thank you. Gary? Washington State gives more than 700 tax breaks to businesses. To increase revenue, would you be in favor of reducing that number? And if so, can you give us any examples? If you aren't in favor of eliminating tax breaks, why not?
Well, I also serve on the Joint Legislative Audit Review Committee, on the executive committee of what they call the JLARC Committee, or which is the performance audit arm of the legislature. It's a bipartisan committee that represents looking at all types of legislation to look at ways that we can basically streamline it, improve it, or modify it. One of the things that part of the JLARC committee is doing is in a systematic fashion looking at all those particular types of tax incentives that have been granted to business, individuals, or organizations over the last 50 years. If there is an answer by that our staff, which basically is a nonpartisan staff, if they are making recommendations that these particular tax incentives are no longer serving the purpose that they were entitled to do and are not meeting the obligations of the legislation when it was passed, then I will certainly be looking forward to removing those tax incentives. A good example is the one dealing with the mortgage rate on homeowners by banks. Last year we did that. We did it with over 2/3 vote. So if there is a justifiable reason to get rid of those tax incentives, let's do that. But let's be very careful and cautious, because the majority of these are basically dealing with small businesses, and they are basically the lifeline for these businesses to keep their doors open and create the jobs we need necessarily in this community. So we don't want to do a situation where we give unfair competition to outside organizations and not protect our own small businesses right here by having those tax benefits. So I'm looking forward to working with the JLARC committee and the legislature as a whole and basically reduce that number where it makes the most sense.
Thank you. Greg?
Okay. First off, I support tax incentives for the sole purpose of job creation and moving forward of business, whether it's small business, large business. If they can truly justify the benefit for tax exemption. I will tell you that I'm firmly committed to reviewing all 700 current tax exemptions, and if they're not doing what they're obligated to do, what they agreed to do, then we need to change that. We need to remove those tax incentives, or at the very least, what we need to do is set up sunset clauses for every single tax exemption that we put out there. We have a review process based on specific standards, but says that this is the expectation. Are you meeting those expectations? And if not, we change that. Understanding that competition drives our economy and it's significantly important for our region. And I support that. But given our current economic status, tax loopholes must be evaluated, their impact. If they're not continuing to meet their obligation, we reduce the impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Greg, current projections indicate that the state will again have a deficit in the next biennium. To fill this gap, do you support raising revenue, and if so, how? If you believe cuts to government expenses are the answer, what services would you cut?
Okay. Here again, you don't bring up any easy questions. Okay, that's one of the most significant. And if I could answer that, I listen to the governor candidates, I look at the Senate, and nobody's come out with a really clear definition. What I hear are we're looking at adjusting loopholes, tax incentives. We talk about efficiencies, being effective with a smaller workforce. We talk about program reduction, furloughs, and those kinds of things. But what I see happening with those are the negative impact or the unintended consequences of those kinds of decisions are it actually hurts our economic ability to move forward. If we increase jobs, if we drive economy, that's going to increase revenue, and increasing revenue is going to help alleviate our current problem. I mentioned earlier that a lot of the problems that we talked about today have a commonality. They've been in front of the legislature for numerous years. These problems are not new. The solutions that they have been piecemeal. And what I suggest today is that we look at long-term revenue stream management. We've got to adjust the revenue stream to meet today's current standards. We have to look in the future, what is it going to cost to do business? Let's look at the impacts of infrastructure, education. What's the benefit of properly funding education? We're going to increase our workforce. They're going to have family wage jobs. They're going to increase state economy, and then they're going to drive commerce. Driving commerce helps the state. So everything's interrelated, and if we piecemeal it, then we're going to continue to deal with these problems. What I suggest is a significant or a serious review of the Washington State revenue stream, manage that to current standards, and it'll be more effective long term.
Thank you. Gary?
Well, getting Washington working again is the number one issue. We have to revitalize the economy. If we can basically put people back to work, provide the trust and confidence in our business leaders to invest, they will generate the revenue that we will need to basically manage our state government. But having said that, I've already demonstrated the fact that we can balance this budget without the need for new taxes. I did that last year. I put out a budget that prioritized where we should be putting our focus on our money, including education, including our most vulnerable populations, our people with mental illness, our adult disabilities, our elderly, and public safety issues. And I've demonstrated we can do that, and we just got to make sure the priorities are there. And what programs have to go away? It's the lowest priority items, such as the Disability Lifeline, which I've helped convert over to a program that is totally federally supported. So I can demonstrate and have shown how to do this without new taxes, but that doesn't mean we can't look at other revenue sources.
Thank you. Now it's time for the candidates' closing statements. First, Gary.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you very much to the League of Women Voters and TCTV for putting this on. I appreciate it very much. I have been here in this studio many times talking to our clients and citizens about the importance of issues that are in front of the legislature. I am very pleased that I have the strong endorsements from both business and labor, almost exclusively in that areas. And I've demonstrated, I think, that even though I've been in the legislature for a while, I have been a leader in trying to provide new direction, providing a more sustainable solution to our budgets, and to make sure that government spends its dollars are doing that in the most effective and efficient manner. I will continue to do that with your support, and I look forward to your vote and look forward to meeting you out in the streets and as I continue to doorbell. Thank you very much.
Greg?
Well, here again, I would like to thank the League of Women Voters. I appreciate the opportunity, TCTV, for having us here today. I would like to leave with this thought, that we cannot continue to have politics as usual. I bring a skill that says that communications has value. Compromise allows us to move forward. Defining problems, looking for solutions, implementing those solutions on a bipartisan basis are the kinds of philosophies that move this state forward, allows us to be successful, plan for the future, and prioritize our programs that are most beneficial to our constituents. I bring those skills, those talents, but I also understand that bipartisan bickering can bring our state legislature to an impasse. Impasse serve nobody. Working together, compromising, finding solutions is what I advocate.
Thank you. This brings us to the end of the forum. Thank you, candidates, and thank you, TCTV and the League of Women Voters for making this forum possible. Viewers, we hope when you vote in the November 6th general election, this information will help you make an informed decision about the candidates for Legislative District 2, Position 1. Goodbye.